How does one read 13 books in a month while working and doing a course overload at school? We don't sleep, that's how. Hi everyone, it's Maddie and welcome back to my channel, where today I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in September. Just a little disclaimer about what I said beforehand. I like to joke about my personal mental health issues, but please sleep, please drink water, please take care of yourselves. But with that being said, I have a lot to wrap up this month. We read 13 books, which I realized I filmed my TBR video for September so late in the month that I had already read, I think it was 3 books. So it seems like I hit my TBR. I didn't. I think I have 4 or 5 books left on my TBR that I need to finish up, but I will just carry those over to October because I had a super ambitious list of books that I wanted to get done in September. So I'm more than content with the fact that I have read 13. Another super exciting thing is that I finished my reading challenge for the year. My reading challenge was set to 50 books on Goodreads, but I was kind of hoping for 52 because 52 is like a book a week for the entire year. And I am currently have read 59 books. So I'm super psyched about that. I'm hoping that the lighting and the quality of this video is a little bit better for you all this time. I might start shooting them more at my desk, I think, because I'm on the floor, like the light from the window doesn't quite get all the way over here, but we'll see. Anyways, in the interest of this video not being 2 hours long, let's get started. The very first book that I read this month was The Shadows by Alex North. This is the second book by Alex North, who also wrote The Whisper Man, which I read in August. I think I read this book, technically it wasn't a day because like it passed midnight, but it was pretty much within one day, and I think my only regret is that I read it so fast that I didn't get to take like all that time to appreciate it. These first couple books I did a reading vlog on, so I will link that in the cards up here if you're interested in going to watch that. So I'll keep it pretty short and sweet on what I thought. So this book kind of flips back and forth between the present. Does it flip back and forth between the present? Yes, I remember what happens now. Wow, when it's been that far in the month that you can't remember. So basically, years ago, there was this number of teens that basically got involved in some sort of kind of cult, demonology, Satanism, dream traveling type thing, and ended up killing one of their classmates. And years later, it seems like someone else has replicated the murder in the same way. So the character of Amanda Beck from the first novel comes back in this novel, even though they're like not really a series, they do exist in the same world. And she's kind of trying to navigate what happened with that murder in order to be able to better understand the case that she is dealing with on her own. I gave it 5 stars. As per usual, Alex North does a beautiful job of balancing out this idea of like this supernatural as well as the real, and kind of like playing with the lines between those. The characters are fascinating, the mystery does a great job, and he is brilliant at plot twists. I get really frustrated because a lot of times I see plot twists coming, so any author who can give me a good plot twist that I don't see coming, I highly appreciate. So 5 stars, would definitely recommend this book to anyone. The next book that I read was Fight Club, which is by, I'm gonna butcher this, Chuck Palahniuk. Fight Club follows 2 characters, Tyler Durden and I believe the narrator. I don't think he has a name in the book. And basically their 2 lives and how they kind of come together, and they end up starting this fight club as a way to kind of feel alive within the monotony of their lives, which is something else that the book does a lot about. It talks about these ideas of like basically just getting up and living the same life over and over again, and what it means to actually live and feel alive within the culture at the time, but it's also something that I think is extremely relevant today. It, of course, is turned into a movie with Brad Pitt and Edward Norton and Helena Bonham Carter. I watched the movie after I read the book, but I think I should have taken a little bit more time between the two of them because they are so similar in some aspects that it was really difficult for me to get through the movie because I was like, I know what's happening. I wasn't sure if I was gonna like this book because of some of the themes and the ideas that it plays with, but I absolutely loved it. His writing is brilliant. That was part of the reason I wanted to read it, because I like share and reblog a lot of quotes by this author, but I'd never actually read a book by him. So that was something that I was really looking forward to. The book is very, very nuanced in the sense that it plays really well with these like themes of masculinity, but also themes of like identity and consumerism and culture, and it really like peels apart and teases all of that. The version that I had an afterword by the author, like done years after this book was originally published, and it was really fascinating to like read his words, the way that this has become a phenomenon, and the fact that there's like actually fight clubs out there now, and what his intentions were, and the way it has been interpreted and become kind of this like pinnacle of media for people to discuss, was really fascinating to read about after finishing the book. So that was another 5-star read right off the bat. Next, I read The Leaf Reader, which is by Emily Arsenault. So it follows this character, Marty Wells, kind of knows that she like weirds people out, so she just decides to start reading tea leaves. She starts reading the tea leaves of some of her classmates, which gets her involved in the disappearance of a classmate that happened, so she kind of gets wrapped up in this mystery, and the tea leaves start maybe being like a little bit too close to reality. Read The Broken Tea Glass by Emily Arsenault, which is probably one of my favorite mysteries of all time. It's really brilliantly done. But this one, I didn't know it was a YA going into it, so there was a lot of that like weird high school drama nonsense that I wasn't a huge fan of, especially a lot of that, oh, a boy and a girl talk to each other, there must be something going on there, which I think I've been reading a lot of queer literature, so like going back to that like very heteronormative YA type novel was like a little bit of a shell shock for me. And then the mystery itself wasn't really that well developed, and I thought the tea leaves were going to have like a bigger part in the story, so I kind of gave it 3 stars because it was kind of like like I was able to get through it. It was a decent read, wasn't anything to like blow my skirt up about. Again, if you want to hear more about it, definitely check out that vlog. After this, I read The Family Upstairs, which is by Lisa Jewell. This was my very first book by her. I know she's like a fairly well-known name in the like mystery thriller type genre, and this was a recommendation from Cat or Paperback Dreams channel, which I will link probably in the description down below. So this follows Libby Jones, who after her 25th birthday basically finds out that her birth family has left her this huge mansion. So it goes kind of back and forth between the past and the present. So the family living in the mansion at that time, and Libby in the present, as well as some of the surviving members of the family who have kind of lost their way and are all trying to find their way back to that mansion. So it's very much playing on that, like, you have pieces of the present and pieces of the past, and you're trying to figure out how they connect to one another to solve the mystery. I gave this book 4 stars because the story was really good, the mystery was really fascinating, and the way that the house was laid out was really interesting to me. Some of the characters too were really, they kind of existed in like these weird in-between states, which was really interesting. The thing that got frustrating to me was, one of the questions is like, who are Libby's parents? And she kind of takes like one plot twist too many, where she keeps leading you to think that it's someone and then changing your mind so that you think it's somebody else. But it gets really frustrating because it starts to get to the point that every time she tells you who you think it is, you don't believe her, because this is like the 4th or 5th time that she's changed your mind. I don't think it actually happens that much, but it felt like she went like a little overboard trying to like plot twist you at the end, and it didn't really feel authentic within the narrative of the story. Also, the way the story ends, I have some questions about, like, what would happen after, but obviously I'm not going to get into that because I want to try and keep this spoiler free. Alright, we're already at 10 minutes, gotta speed this up. The next book I read is The Silent Patient, and The Silent Patient follows Alicia Bernenson? I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it follows this woman who essentially is a famous painter, and she's married to this famous fashion photographer, and then out of nowhere she kills him, and then like refuses to speak after she's done this. You follow this therapist who has an interesting fascination with her case and basically wants to go to the hospital to treat her. I gave this book 5 stars. I was reading it in like the loft of my townhouse, and it was like 1 a.m. and I turned the page and I got to like the big kind of twist reveal at the end, and like my jaw just like dropped open and my eyes just like went like deer in the headlights. I was like, shit, like that's good. So plot twist that surprises me, always good. The characters are really interesting. The mystery was really fascinating to me. I really enjoyed reading about all of that. I don't know if I can rave more about this book without getting into the nitty-gritty of what happens, but this is probably one of the best thrillers that I have read in a really long time. And it also plays a lot with that idea of the mystery and like trying to tease out what's like actually going on in her mind, and trying to put together the pieces of what happened and why she killed her husband before it's actually revealed to you. And then I was trying to decide which book to read next, and literally one night I just picked up Nick and Charlie off of my shelf and I read it in one sitting. It is a novella and it also has pictures. I'm just gonna find one because we need to appreciate how beautiful Alice Oseman's artwork is. Takes place after Heartstopper and Solitaire happen. Nick and Charlie are the 2 main characters, and they're dating, they're in a relationship with each other, and Nick is going to be going off to university, and Charlie, who is a year younger, will be left behind to still go out to high school. And it kind of follows Charlie's anxiety and his fears about that, and how they kind of navigate that moving forward. I think it's really interesting because it does a lot with the expectations of relationships versus like the reality. So I think Charlie does a lot of like comparing to the people around him, where there's this idea that like, what is the point in trying to continue a relationship when you go to university, because there's this assumption that it's immediately going to fall apart. It's wholesome, it's really fluffy and soft at the end. There are definitely parts that I just want to crawl in and give people hugs. The artwork is beautiful. 5 stars. Anything by Alice Oseman is 5 stars for me. Alright, what do we got next? Next we have Such a Fun Age, which is by Kylie Reed. This book has been a bit of like a, I want to say hot button issue, but it's like, I think it's up for the Booker Prize, and I've seen a lot of people talking about it, especially in this era of Black Lives Matter and anti-Black racism and anti-racism movements that have been going on. I've seen a lot of like people hosting book talks and discussions about it. I believe it was the book club choice for the Reading Rush's book club that they held. So the book follows Amira, who is a babysitter for this famous kind of like influencer, Alex Chamberlain, and one night she is out at a grocery store. Well, she gets called by Alex to take their daughter to a grocery store so that they can deal with something that's happened at home, and she basically gets accosted by a police officer, or a security guard, I guess, who thinks that because she's black and the baby that she has with her is white, or the toddler she has with her, they think that she abducted the child. I think the way that this book is advertised is a little bit misleading, because it makes it seem like that's going to be this huge thing and Alex is going to be like trying to help her advocate for it, and it's going to be a matter of like whose story is really getting told. But the truth is, like, that's kind of the pinnacle. That's not really the pinnacle of the story. The story does a lot with these ideas of like subtle racism and kind of like dealing with like the white savior complex and this need to be validated in our allyship, which I think is really, really fascinating, because the truth is like Amira is able to like accept and move on from the incident a lot, and the book has to do with Alex and one of the other characters who was a shopper when that happened and recorded it. They're kind of wanting to use this as some sort of like performative activism, or like having this incident force them to like challenge their own beliefs about the way that they're treating the people within their own life, which is really interesting. But this book doesn't only tackle like obvious issues of like racism and everything that goes along with that. It has a lot of really interesting points about family and family dynamics, with Alex being this like social influencer. Her image is like really important to her, and sometimes her kids fall to the side, and Amira, being this babysitter, has like this really strong connection with Alex's children, particularly her eldest daughter. And for me, like being I was a babysitter for years, there was like something in that that I really connected to, with the idea that like you become so attached to these like children that you're responsible for taking care of, but eventually one day you're gonna like walk out the door and there's this question of like, will these kids even remember you when they took up so much place in your life? Very nuanced, very well done. The writing is really good, and there's so many layers that could be pulled apart in it. I really wish that I had read this before a lot of those book clubs happened, so I could have been more actively involved in those conversations, but I think there's still all sorts of people talking about it, having those conversations online, so I would definitely recommend taking the time to read this book, because it's a really important read, and I think it does a lot to look at the ways that race influences people's lives and racism occurs in ways that are like a lot less blatant and in your face. Because I think it's just as important to realize that people might be making those like snap judgments and those thought processes in ways that aren't as well vocalized or as well seen and recognized, but that can still have detrimental impacts in the long run. That was a 4-star read. And then after that, I read The Inexplicable Logic of My Life. This was a 5-star read, and it follows Sal and his kind of journey to find himself and find his place in the world with his adopted father, who has basically been his father his whole life, and his like loving Mexican family, and he's white, so he's trying to kind of figure out how he fits into the world, what he wants to do with his life, and where he's kind of gonna go, and it kind of ends up coming out of him in this rage that keeps getting him involved in fights. I won't say more about that because I do have a whole review video that I will link up here if you want to hear me talk more about it, but it is written by the same author who wrote Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. So if you liked that book, you will definitely like this one. I actually liked it more, which might be a little bit more controversial. But yeah, 5-star read. After that book, I read Trust Exercise, which I think is my... maybe not. I had 2 1-star reads this month, but this was one of my 1-star reads. It follows this like elite performing arts school in America in like the 1980s and focuses around like the relationship of these 2 main characters, Sarah and David, and basically their teacher can like tell that something went on with them in the summer and he ends up getting super involved in it. The book starts with like a drama exercise the teacher's having them do where he turns all the lights off and they kind of have to like crawl and move around the room the best that they can, and I think it's supposed to be like taking in space and like understanding your own body and how it operates in the space. But then like these 2 characters just meet each other and start like making out and like feeling each other up in the darkness, and I'm like, what is happening? Because I think they're 15 when this is happening, 14 or 15, and there's like reference to one of them having had sex before, which like whatever, you do you, but it was just very creepy to like be reading about kids this age, this young. There's like doing that in like such an explicit manner because it gets more explicit when other stuff is happening. This book also has teachers having relationship with minors and just adults in general having relationship with minors, which is very, very frustrating to me. There's so much more about this book that made me really, really uncomfortable, and I don't have time to like tease it all apart. But like there wasn't any motivation for me to keep reading because these characters were all just like such shitty people, and they were like getting like basically abused and mistreated and taken advantage of by these people in positions of power, and there's no like resolution for that at the end. And I think it's supposed to be like this critique about like, you know, suburbia in America and what it creates and what these like elite schools do to kids, but it just ended up being a very uncomfortable disaster of reading about people who were way too young that were doing things that, like, again, live your life, but like issues of consent, statutory rape, and things like that get completely muddled and completely avoided in this book, which I think is really dangerous. And I did not like it. I did not like it. I don't want to read about like super explicit sex scenes between 15-year-olds. I am sorry. 1-star would not recommend this book. Okay, let's move on. So literally this book was sandwiched between 2 5-star reads because there was The Inexplicable Logic of My Life, which was 5 stars, and then the next book that I read, which I also gave 5 stars, and it's called Cracked Not Broken, Surviving and Thriving After a Suicide Attempt. I need to slow down my talking, but I'm trying to make this video a reasonable amount of time. It's by Kevin Hines, and he is, I believe it's the 26th person to survive jumping off of the Golden Gate Bridge. I think only 33 people have survived doing that. Don't quote me on those statistics. Essentially jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge with the attempt of ending his life and ended up surviving. So it is about his struggles with bipolar disorder and how he, I don't want to say overcame them, because that's one of my favorite things about this book. It's like a nonfiction memoir. He doesn't basically wake up after trying to take his own life and realize everything's like gonna be okay. Like, he still struggles and he has psychotic episodes and he has these really difficult periods of times where he has to keep like ending back up in the hospital. So it's a discussion about like the journey and the process of mental illness, and the way that basically like there is no like cure, there is no end all. Like, there's going to be difficult times, there's going to be like really good times, but being able to like make that decision to stay and being able to make those decisions to try and like get help for you. But it's also a really great conversation piece around the stigmatization of mental illness. He talks about being on that bus and heading towards the bridge and like basically crying and like talking to himself and having this really difficult episode, and everyone on the bus looking away from him and refusing to say something. And he has this moment where he says like, no one said something, like, would I have said something in the same scenario? And then he says, would you? And it's like a direct question to the reader of like, are you willing to step up and make an active effort to help save the lives of those people around you? I think suicide is a really taboo topic, and I think one of the things that he does a great job with in the book is like recognizing that sometimes like you have to ask the question like, are you considering suicide, or do you need to go to the hospital right now? And people think that that's scary and that's like difficult to do, which it really is, because you don't want to see the people in your life hurting, but it's also important to give them that place to be able to reach out and to get the support that they need. The entire time I was reading this book, I was like pausing to write stuff down, things that have really resonated with me in my own personal experience with mental illness, as well as things that I just think he did a brilliant job of wording in a way that I don't know if I would have ever been able to do. Essentially, the whole book is this big, I want to say it's a love letter to life, but it's a love letter to fighting, to the struggle, and to like, no matter how difficult it gets, being willing to overcome. He talks about like the need to share his story and the way that that has helped. He hopes it helps the people around him, and why he keeps talking about it, and what the importance is to him to share that story and to be able to, I want to say, like spark a connection or an understanding for people who might be going through the same experience, and hopefully help them not get to the point that he was at. He obviously still struggles with his mental illness today, but he's a huge advocate and speaker on all of these issues. This read I picked out particularly for, it's been on my TBR for a while, but I particularly read it in September because September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. So I think this book looks a lot at not only individual actions you can take, but greater actions that society can take to prevent suicide from happening. I didn't know there's no bars or net on the side of the Golden Gate Bridge, which is awful, and it is a huge problem, reason why a lot of people end up taking their lives there, so that's something else that he's been a huge advocate for. This book is just it's a great learning opportunity if you don't quite understand those experiences. It's a really good way to break down the stigmatization that surrounds a lot of mental illness, and it's also just a really validating experience for anyone who's ever been through a mental illness, just to know that you feel understood and that somebody else sees you, and to be able to reconcile the fact that there is hope on the other side of that pain, and that no matter how difficult it gets, you can continue to fight to pull yourself through. So I might do a whole video on that, but I think I said way too much on it right now, but I did really want to take a lot of time to talk about that, because I do think these issues are so important, and I do think the fact that there are books out there like this that exist is extremely important, and everyone should be taking the time to do your own research and expand your own knowledge so that you can help support the people around you and cause lasting change, because we need to dismantle the structures so that they can better support the people who are struggling. We have 3 books left. We've got through 10 of them. Next book was a book that I read for class, and it is a Sicilian Romance. It is a gothic romance, not romances in the sense of like kissing, falling in love, but like the romantic period of writing. And it centers around this castle, essentially, and they keep kind of seeing these shadows and There's this part of the castle that's locked off that people think that somebody might be living in, and all the questions that have to go with that. But then it also has all the great elements of Gothic. You know, we got women locked up and the star-crossed lovers who can't be together no matter how desperately they try to get together. I gave the book 3 stars. I was kind of here nor there with it. It wasn't really my favorite read from that period of time. People like die and then come back to life a lot in the book, which is a little bit frustrating. That might be a bit of a spoiler alert, but the book is 200 some odd years old, so I'm sorry. So that was a little bit frustrating because it felt like every time something concrete was happening, you didn't really know whether it was happening or not. As I was like writing in a discussion post, I was like, these people really need to learn how to stop getting stabbed all the time. And also, most of the people in the book don't make any decisions for themselves. They just kind of like run away and then do their own thing, you know? The women just faint every time a problem comes up. The classics from this era. 3 stars because it's pretty much eh. That's kind of how I feel about it. The next book I read is my other 1-star read. I actually started this a lot earlier in the month, but it took me a really long time to finish it because I had a really difficult time getting into it. This is called The Only Good Indians, and it's by Stephen Graham Jones, and this book has been like one of the best or like the most recommended horror novels that I've seen out there, so I was really excited for it. It says it's a tale of revenge, culture, identity, and the cost of breaking from tradition, and it kind of follows these 4 Indigenous men who 10 years before the book starts went hunting for some elk, and basically things kind of went sideways and they ended up killing a lot of the elk that they couldn't bring back with them. They killed this elk who happened to be pregnant, and now the elk has come back for them to try and exact its revenge. So that's a little bit interesting in general, but being an Indigenous person and growing up around that culture and that idea of like spirits of animals, that wasn't something that I found difficult to grasp. The part that I found difficult to grasp was I didn't understand why the elk was following them. I get it, they were hunting on land that they weren't supposed to be hunting on, that was supposed to be reserved for the elders, and they killed a lot of elk that they didn't bring back with them, but the elk that they did kill, who was fairly young and ended up being pregnant, they made sure that they brought all the meat and the hide and all of that, and it got all divided, and they ended up actually sharing it with the elders in their community to try and, I guess, reconcile for what they did. Now, I'm not a hunter, and not a lot of people in my family hunt, but from my own understanding of like my own Indigenous traditions and culture, I'm Ojibwe. This book follows Blackfeet people, so obviously it's going to be a different experience. But as long as you like lay down your tobacco and you're using all of the parts of the animal and you're appreciating the spirit and the culture of the animal, I think that's what matters, or at least to me in my own experience, that's what matters. So like obviously they killed a bunch of elk that they didn't take back, but I didn't really understand why the spirit was hunting them for it. I think also just personally because I'm like, white people, like I'm half Scottish, that me included, have been like slaughtering and killing animals and like not properly recognizing the importance of the animal, or not using up all the parts of the animal or taking care of it, and hunting on lands that they aren't supposed to be hunting on for like generation after generation. So I think it was really frustrating to me to see like Indigenous people getting punished for it when this is something that has been like a major issue and a major problem with colonization for a really long time. There are certain scenes with like a sweat lodge, and they end up kind of getting attacked in the middle of the sweat, which like that's a very spiritual thing. I understand that they're maybe not practicing the traditions the same way that the traditions would be practiced originally, but there's also a lot of different pieces that come up with that in terms of like poverty and what people have access to nowadays. So I don't know. I'm not super close, and I'm obviously not a knowledge keeper or anything on any of these traditions. This is just my own personal opinion. For someone who doesn't have like any experience, I don't think this would be the best introduction to them for the culture, when like everyone who is taking part of the culture in some ways, apparently if they don't do it exactly correct, they get murdered for it. Especially too, I wasn't vouching like for like the book just made me sad because I just watched all these people get intentionally attacked for something that I didn't necessarily feel was justifiable. So I don't like reading about Indigenous people getting murdered and slaughtered or living out these terrible lives, because unfortunately sometimes that's a little too close to reality. And for me, that's kind of where I sat with this book, where I was like, why are we coming up with some sort of sci-fi reason to subject more nonsense onto Indigenous people when colonization and the culture as it is already subjecting more violence? It's like, we're kind of living in a horror story right now. Do we really need to create another one? But I only gave it 1 star. The writing was really good, so that was what was able to pull me through to finish it, because a lot of times I don't really have 1-star reads because I normally give up because I'm not going to waste my time on a book that I'm not going to enjoy. Very last book. And then you don't have to listen to me talk anymore. I'm also like exhausted of talking myself. The very last book I read this month is I Wish You All the Best, and this is by Mason Deaver. Deaver? I should really know how to pronounce names, but like I say all the time, I read things, I don't say it, so then when I come to do these videos, I realize I don't know how to pronounce it. But this book follows a non-binary teenager, Ben, who gets kicked out of his house after they come out to their parents, and they end up moving in with their sister Hannah and their sister Hannah's husband Thomas. So it really follows their journey to kind of experience and understand themselves as they kind of finish their last half of their senior year at this brand new school, as well as their relationship and friendship that develops with Nathan Allen, who is also a senior at the school and is trying to kind of support them and welcome them into the space. And of course, between the two of them, there might be a little bit something more going on. I've read books that have non-binary characters, but this is the first book I have read with a non-binary protagonist. So that's exciting, and I think it's super important that books like this exist so that people can see themselves represented and understand their own experience. The writing is really good, it's really easy to get through. This book does do one of my favorite things that seems to be a trope in YA literature, but specifically queer YA literature, is representing personal experience through art within the novel, which I love, but I also always wish that I could like actually see the art, because like being able to describe art and actually seeing the art are two very different things. But that is one of my favorite things, that they kind of draw this duality between a lot in some of those books, where the painting is a way to try and like represent their inner turmoil or whatever they're going through, or just to be able to express themselves. Final points on this book also does some really interesting things about the concept of family and what it means to have family, and whether or not those people always have to fit into your life, because I think there's this idea that because you're blood related to someone, you have to keep them in your life, and there's like a requirement to love them and have them be a part of your life. And this book looks a lot at Ben and their found family and how they are able to kind of create this new safe world for themselves as they kind of venture out after, of course, what is this extremely traumatic experience. So I gave this book 4 stars. It was a really good read, and I really enjoyed it. I got through it really quickly, so I definitely recommend taking a chance to check that out. I was hoping to get to 14 books this month, because I started Loveless by Alice Oseman. Literally, I think it was like 1 a.m. on September 30th. I wasn't able to push through and get through that one, so that will definitely be the very first book on my October wrap-up when I do that. I'm thinking of doing a TBR video a little bit later, probably next week, on what I'm looking to read this month. I'm really hoping to get some spooky horror books in. I was just watching Paperback Dreams, or Kat, her TBR, and the books that she's picked out to read for October, and I've got some good horror recs based off of that, plus I have a stack of Stephen King novels that are burning a hole through my bookshelf that I need to get to. And of course I need to finish up the rest of the books that were on my September TBR that I didn't get to. So I'm sure I will make some time to film that and discuss it all here with you. In the meantime, you can check out my blog down below. I actually have plans to start updating it once a week again now that October has started. You can follow my Instagram as well, which I'll be doing the Inktober challenge on, so if you want to see some of my art and what I've been doing, you can follow me there. And of course, if you want to keep up with what I'm reading, my Goodreads will be linked in the description below. Other than that, I try to post videos on this channel about once a week, but I don't have a regular update schedule. So, now that I can breathe, after talking so much, I'm sorry if that was way too fast. please tell me and I will work on slowing down in the future, but I was trying to make this not an hour ordeal. That's everything that I read in September. If you have book recs for me for October, please leave a comment down below. If you've read any of these books and have different or other thoughts on them, also leave me a comment down below. I love hearing from you guys and what you think of these videos and what else you'd like to see on my channel. So I look forward to talking to you, and until next time, I hope you all have a great week.